If you happen to wake up and find yourself in the transition from 1993 to 1994, it would be fair to say that you would struggle to walk into a music shop and buy an analog synth. Your best bet would be to find something that was old, and you might get away with buying a 101 or a 303, but you'd be starting to pay a fairly hefty price for them. At least that's what people thought was a hefty price at the time. You couldn't just buy a brand new analog synth back then from a shop. But that was set to change. Someone at Novation had the wherewithal to realise that if they could make a simple knobby analog synth that was affordable, they'd likely sell a bunch. And so Novation hired one of the best synth minds in the UK, a man called Chris Huggett. Chris was the brains behind the EDP Wasp and the Oxford Oscar, both incredibly legendary and quirky, weird British synths. And he designed a synthesizer that used elements of the Wasp and elements of the concept of the 303. And so Huggett and the team created the Bass Station. And Bass Stations got picked up and used and loved. Prodigy had a Bass Station. Dave Spears, a man who would go on to create a company called GForce, who makes software recreations of synths. One of his first synths he ever messed with was a Wasp. And he knew Chris Huggett, and he owned Bass Station 001. Dave credits Chris as both an inspiration and a friend. And that's important because this piece of software that we're going to look at today is both a recreation of the Bass Station and it's also made by GForce, Dave's company. And the plugin will be sold by GForce, but it will also come with Novation keyboards. That is the Launch Key Mark IVs, the FL Key, and the SL Mark III keyboards. And perhaps you've got one of those things, so you might like to watch this video to see what it can do. I want to thank Novation for commissioning me to make a demo of this thing, because I think the Bass Station is an unsung little hero. It is the original affordable analog synth, and it reminds us that concept is actually quite a bit older. In fact, you might well argue the original was the Wasp. Unlike the Wasp, this is a device and now piece of software that bears the work of the British legend of synths. That is Chris Huggett. And through this, his work will live on. So let me give you a whistle-stop tour of the Bass Station. We'll talk about the things the original did, and then we'll also talk about the new, quite bonkers stuff that the plugin affords. So if we initialize it once again, you blend the two oscillators together with the mix control, create big, nice sort of chordy tunings, or detune. Add that sub, oof. Flippin' heck. The Sub FM. Filter it. We can apply the envelope very conveniently. Add some release. It goes up to 10 seconds, which is quite long. And the shortest is 0, and the longest is 6 seconds for the attack. So we can apply the LFO to the filter, variable wave shapes, all well and good. George Orwell and good. But of course you can, like, you know, it's not just bass. Like, you've got long attack, and so you could go like, move it up, saws, turn off this weird FM. We're basically getting into like Blade Runner sort of sound territory, but it'd be nice if it was polyphonic. Of course it is, because it's a plugin. If you right click down here and hit poly, you can even choose the amount of notes from 1 to 16 that it has. know. I'm obviously adding loads of reverb, but, you know, give me that. It makes really nice, like, pads and... like, really nice. It's got this nice spread control, which stereoizes. You know, spreads it in the stereo spectrum. Lovely. As well as unison here, which you can do, like, storming bass, which I'm obviously not doing with this sound. Now, the modern stuff is... effects, as you heard me adding reverb there. You've got reverb, delay, which is all really nice, like nicely done. Chorus with different modes, a distortion, which sounds nice to me. And like I've used the distortion to basically help create drums. You do have noise here, by the way, as well as a high pass to thin out sounds. Very useful just to like take the edge off bassy stuff when actually what you want to make is pads. You can thin them out, and it's resonant. Very, actually quite intense. Now, here's the bonkers thing. So this XLFO and XADSR, what these are they are an LFO and an envelope that is built into every single knob that does that when you click it. So not absolutely everything has this, like the delay times don't seem to. Unless I'm missing something, please correct me if I'm wrong. But most of the settings on the synth do. So for example, the filter. If I click the filter and I then turn up the amount control, this kind of white glow emanates to tell me that I have applied magic godlike magic LFO. And you can basically change the waveforms, you can add onset delay, you can add a sample and hold to it, smoothing, and adjust the phase of when the LFO starts. It's useful if you're trying to get things like to have a certain rhythm to them. And so using this, you can get this like wonderful animation so that every moment the filter is in different positions. You can also come in here and use velocity. That's the MIDI velocity lane. So for example, if I was to record this, when you create MIDI like this, one of the key things that you will end up baking in is called velocity. That is the strength of the key as you hit it, in case you're not familiar with it. And if you look here behind the oscilloscope thing here, there is velocity. And if I turn this up, what I'm doing is I'm sending these little values to control the filter. And if I put the filter in different positions, so for example, I have the filter down low and I turn this up high, then what this is doing is it means that I now can control the filter setting from 0 to 100% with these little sliders. And if you don't use Ableton Live, there will be an equivalent in any other DAW. Even your Atari can do this as well. If you're still on Atari, that's fine. Although, good luck getting the bass station to run. You will probably need an original bass station. And so the value of this is in the fact that by highly animating controls, you can make things that are very expressive and interesting. Some of my favorite musicians spend a lot of time, possibly an irrational amount of time, playing with settings such as these to make a very simple synthesizer sound very complicated. And then there is also an envelope. So whilst obviously there is envelope 2 control for the filter here, I've got this whole other one that I can apply. I mean, you might do something like nuts, like have the Osc Sub FM be... oh yeah. Very cool. So there's a lot you can do with this. Like, you can make everything with this to some extent, you know? And so what I've done, and what I will play you now, is a track that I have made with 16 instances of Bass Station, the plugin, doing literally everything. And I do mean everything, like bass, drums, snare, and like weird sort of squitty percussion as well. I've used a bunch of presets and I made a couple of sounds myself from scratch. And I hope it just sort of gives you a sense that what is fun and interesting about this is both to play with something that's historic, was used in the 90s, but is also really quite simple. And I think there's a lot to be said for something that's simple, but that through clever stuff like the XLFO, the XADSR, and down here there's a sequencer too, that you can push a voice around, freak a voice out, freaking things and pushing them. It's the idea that instead of you using something really complicated to make a complicated sound, and perhaps the thing itself being a little overwhelming, here you have a really simple synth, and the game will be how much can you push it around and make something creative and interesting. You know, how creative can you be and push things around and get unexpected and interesting results from something? I think this will encourage you to play in that sort of way. And the other game that I recommend playing is using a synth to make every single sound. It's an excellent way to teach yourself a synth, but it is also an excellent way to limit you in this limitless computer world. Try using something, if not this, there's something like it. Pick one synth and make absolutely every part using that synth. If you don't have enough computing power, then just print the parts as you go using one single instance. It's fun, and you'll learn something in the process.